Hi, this is Sqrawn with a standard deck tech on Sultai Incarnation. Sultai Incarnation is based on the card Enigmatic Incarnation. It's an enchantment from Theros Beyond Death which reads, at the beginning of your end step, you may sacrifice another enchantment. If you do, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1, plus the sacrifice enchantment's converted mana cost, put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. Now, this is a fairly complicated design reminiscent of the card Birthing Pod from New Phyrexia, which was a standout card back in its day, and had a very strong modern run until its ban. So this being a very similar design to Birthing Pod has some people excited over the potential. However, there are key differences with Enigmatic Incarnation. Right off the bat, it's a multicolored card requiring green and blue, so you're more limited in the decks that you can actually put this into. And it's at 4 mana rather than Birthing Pod's Phyrexian mana, allowing it to be cheated in a little bit on turn 3 or even as early as turn 2 with a mana dork on turn 1. So you could put that in any deck that has at least green. And this requires more commitment. You have to have green and blue, and you also need to feed in enchantments rather than creatures. And this is the most significant aspect of it as far as I'm concerned, where you must feed enchantments to get creatures out, whereas Birthing Pod lets you put creatures in to get creatures out. And this is significant because you must sacrifice an enchantment to get a creature out, and unless that is an enchantment creature, you cannot then feed that creature in to get another permanent out through Enigmatic Incarnation. This is starkly different to Birthing Pod, which lets you go feeding in a CMC 3 creature to get a CMC 4 creature, and then on the next turn when you untap and can tap the Birthing Pod again, you can feed that 4 CMC creature which you got out with the Birthing Pod into the Birthing Pod again to get a CMC 5 creature and continue staircasing that way. And people are looking at Enigmatic Incarnation and trying their best to come up with staircase type strategies to continue escalating from CMC 4 to 5 to 6 to 7, and they're looking at cards like Gravebreaker Lamia into Athreos, and then into finishing with something like Agent of Treachery. So whatever you cap off with as a creature is your kind of dead end. So even if you already get a CMC 3 creature out, you can't continue, and if it's not an enchantment creature, you can't continue feeding that creature in, and you're soft capped, you could suppose, by what you're getting into if it's a creature. So the hope is to continue feeding enchantments into it, and you can try to go the route of feeding enchantment creatures in and getting enchantment creatures out and sustaining that. That's when it can try and mirror the effect of Birthing Pod as faithfully as possible, but it's such a constraint to actually feed in enchantment creatures because there are so few of them next to regular creatures. It's not too much of a payoff to really try go that way. I feel that's actually a bit of a trap. Now, there are really cool things that you can do nonetheless with Enigmatic Incarnation. So there are enchantments you may want to feed in. There are enchantments which have into the battlefield effects, and you get that value, and then you have the value of having this permanent on the battlefield, which is more or less blank, and getting to feed that for extra value into Enigmatic Incarnation to get that creature out. So there are a number of ways people have tried to build around Enigmatic Incarnation, and shout out to Kangaroo from the Rogue Deckbuilder crew who brought Enigmatic Incarnation to my attention with a really cool build around ley lines. And the idea is to cheat in ley lines, and then on the turn that you drop Enigmatic Incarnation, well, you can sacrifice that ley line to go from CMC 4 to 5 on a creature and really get something in like a Cavalier of Thorns. Now, a strategy like that, I think, is a little bit dependent on getting the right hand, and from Kangaroo's list, there was this cool interaction which I overlooked at first, and that was the interaction of Thassa Deep Dwelling with Polychronos Unchained. And this comes out of more of a toolbox approach, and you'll probably see toolbox variants of Enigmatic Incarnation wanting to use the Thassa and Polychronos Unchained interaction here, where Polychronos Unchained enters the battlefield with 6+ counters on it, and you can sacrifice a CMC3 enchantment to just fish this out, and when you're activating its fight ability, it's going to lose its counters, and Thassa can refresh Polychronos every turn to come in with a refreshed 6 counters. So you're able to keep fighting, and you will not have Polychronos normally die if you can help it. If you're fighting things that are with with power 3, 4, as long as Polychronos can survive the fight, then you can keep refreshing it with Thassa, and you have a pretty strong board control option here. So yeah, shout out again to Kangaroo. That's a really cool strat to employ these two together. And initially I wasn't too hot on using these because it was much more of a toolbox package, and I wanted to go more consistent route. And to that end, I wanted to build around the omens a bit more. I wanted to use Omen of the Sea quite a lot, and a lot of value for me comes in this being a preordain, which you can cast at instant speed for an extra mana, and this enters the battlefield, you scry 2 and then draw a card, and it remains as an enchantment that has this activated ability, which you might use and you're probably not too hot on using, but it's really nice if the game has gone late and you really want to dump mana into getting some extra value here and there and inching slight advantages. But the really nice thing about it is Omen of the Sea can then be sacrificed to Enigmatic Incarnation to fish something out and start this staircasing effect. And what I personally really like about Omen of the Sea is that you can hold up mana for Quench, and depending on what the opponent does, you have the luxury to then go, well, counterspell or dig, and I quite like that, and that gives it quite a nice, consistent, solid start. From turn 2, you start to really be able to shape the game in your favor, and that's quite a nice edge. So Omen of the Hunt was also brought to my attention by Kangaroo, and that's a really cool card where I was very excited to see this. To me, this really convinced me to go committing onto the control plan, where this is CMC 3 and ramps, so it's a sort of rampant growth design, and like the rest of the Omen cycle, you can sacrifice it with the activated ability to scry, and this is more of a late game feature, but it itself sticks around as an enchantment that's mostly blank in the early game, so you can sacrifice it to the effect of Enigmatic Incarnation to start that staircase effect going. Now, what I like is also running Thassa's Intervention with this to be able to have, similarly to Quench with Omen of the Sea, that option of on the second turn to be able to counter or dig. Thassa's Intervention can counterspell. It can play like a soft cancel here. It's a soft counter which for 3 mana invested into it, you can counter a spell unless its controller pays 2 mana. And this is something that only gets stronger as the game goes on, and being able to hold Thassa's Intervention up with Omen of the Hunt and doing whichever you're favored to do, this gives a lot of flexibility to the deck in the early game. Now, there's another aspect to the deck which I really enjoyed building into, and that's to go the Sultai path, and Sultai control specifically. So Sultai is my favorite 3-color combination, and with Sultai you get to take advantage of Treacherous Blessing. And I feel a lot of decks will eventually embrace Treacherous Blessing. A lot of Enigmatic Incarnation decks will find a way to run Treacherous Blessing because it's such a clean strat to be able to curve into Treacherous Blessing and Enigmatic Incarnation one after the other, because Treacherous Blessing can draw into Enigmatic Incarnation and then fuel it to get whatever creature you're looking for out. So Treacherous Blessing appealed to me because I also wanted to use Vraska Golgari Queen, and it's a very straightforward combination to be using Treacherous Blessing with Vraska Golgari Queen, but I feel like using Vraska in addition to Enigmatic Incarnation gives that consistency where if you're not going to draw into one, you're maybe going to draw into the other. And I committed to building around Vraska and really a Sultai control build, which is trying to ride off value gains from Vraska and Enigmatic Incarnation. So I was thinking about the very real chance of being able to ultimate Vraska, and I thought, well, I needed a creature that can attack and not be blocked. And that led me to discovering Etrata the Silencer, which really defines my own deck for this Enigmatic Incarnation archetype here, and this is my own spin on it, where Etrata the Silencer is a really unique twist that you can take with a deck where this can come out immediately from an Enigmatic Incarnation which sacrifices an Omen of the Hunt, or Treacherous Blessing, or Dryad of the Elysian Grove, and puts Etrata onto the board, and the next turn she goes in. I'll give this a read because this is a little bit of a complicated card in itself. So Etrata the Silencer reads, Etrata the Silencer can't be blocked. So that's cool with the Vraska, but it's a lot more than that, as I realized immediately when I was checking out the card. I thought, wow, whenever Etrata deals combat damage to a player, exile target creature that player controls and put a hit counter on that card. That player loses the game if they own 3 or more exiled cards with hit counters on them. Etrata's owner shuffles Etrata into their library. So when Etrata shuffles herself back into the library, if you can drop an enchantment on the next turn that's CMC 3, you can fish her back out again. And that compensates for her built-in drawback, which means that you're able to drop her on turn 4 or fish her out with Enigmatic Incarnation and hit on turn 5, and you're able to then drop an enchantment with CMC 3 and feed Enigmatic Incarnation into getting her out. And what's great about this is she goes into library during combat, so she goes in before the end step when Enigmatic Incarnation checks for an enchantment to then sacrifice and get her out of the library. So you can, with a single Etrata the Silencer, I feature 2 in the deck just for some consistency, you're able to keep her hitting every turn so long as you can feed those enchantments in. And so that really encouraged me to then run something like Elspeth's Nightmare here, which is wanting to go more into the plan of CMC 3 enchantments and going, okay, we've got more control and some hand disruption here. You can curve Elspeth's Nightmare into Etrata the Silencer, so you don't depend entirely on Enigmatic Incarnation, which I think is going to be a weakness for a lot of other variants for the Enigmatic Incarnation strategy, where if you don't get Incarnation, what are you going to do? And this deck goes, well, we've got Etrata the Silencer, which we can confidently put out on turn 4. There's Vraska Golgari Queen, and those are really nice alternatives to just jamming out an Enigmatic Incarnation. And what's great is there's a lot of cross synergies that are quite subtle here and there, and well, Elspeth's Nightmare is really nice because it destroys a low power creature, and maybe it won't, but you certainly get that duress on the next turn, and that turn, when you cast this on turn 3 and curve into turn 4, you are going to get both the defeat effect, which is a destroyed target creature an opponent controls with power 2 or less, and the duress-like effect, which is look at their hand and choose a non-land, non-creature card and discard it. And you get to go turn 3 Elspeth's Nightmare, they lose a creature, hopefully, and then turn 4 you will draw and have the second chapter of Elspeth's Nightmare before you drop Enigmatic Incarnation. and so you get to duress ahead of Enigmatic Incarnation, and once Enigmatic Incarnation resolves and you move to the end step, then you sacrifice Elspeth's Nightmare to then put Etrata the Silencer onto the battlefield, and it's going to be able to attack in the next turn. And that's very clean. And that's before the last ability of Elspeth's Nightmare, which is to wipe the opponent's graveyard, which is also a very useful effect in the metagame. And certain options that I have in the deck, I may up or lower the counts. This is just natural when it comes to practicing with a deck and really getting the hang of it, and updating your design. And so this is a card, depending as well on the meta, just what power 2 or less creatures come into popularity. This may see more play overall. And Dryad of the Elysian Grove is one such creature which is probably going to see a lot of play, and we're only running 2 here, and I'd only actually gone for 1 at first because I was thinking to diversify a little bit. So there's some sideboard options which are pretty interesting, which help to diversify your curving. So you have Naiad of Hidden Coves, which really builds on the control aspect, but I found this wasn't really essential to the core of the deck, and I think the Dryad of the Elysian Grove is nice because it's a 2/4, and this is sturdy and is more likely to survive turn 3 into turn 4, where it can be sacrificed to Enigmatic Incarnation. And there are going to be decks which take more advantage in general of Dryad of the Elysian Grove. This one isn't really taking great advantage of the mana fixing ability, where lands you control are every basic land type in addition to other types, and the ramp ability, which is you may play additional land at each of your turns. Neither is really being taken full advantage of in this deck, so you can run as few as 2, even 1 in my take here. So another option that I really enjoy in this deck is Alarios Enraptured, and and this is a really interesting one-off here, where while I don't go too much on the toolbox strategy, this is pretty nice to synergize the way you have Thassa Deep Dwelling getting value off Polukranos Unchained to be able to repeatedly fight things and be refreshed so it can continue to fight and control the board. Alarios Enraptured is able to create a 3/2 blue reflection token when it comes in, and Thassa can repeatedly blink Alarios to create more tokens, which can be sacrificed for Vraska Golgari Queen. So this is a sort of a fringe thing where it may be something that ends up moving to the sideboard, but this is something that you can really use for inevitability. And this is, I think, the key for a card like Enigmatic Incarnation, where you're able to get out specific cards that you can feed in enchantments for. And in the case of Alarios Enraptured, you can feed in Omens of the Sea. And it may be something that maybe there will be cards like there's the Wolf Willow something. It's the enchantment which is CMC 2 and ramps you up a little bit, but I didn't include it in this list because it gives only green mana in addition, and to me the mana fixing is a little more important. Even though I don't greatly value Dryad of the Elysian Grove's mana fixing, it's because we're limited to 3 colors and not really going for the greedy 4 or 5 color mashup, and so that's fine, but you can still feel that limitation with the Wolf Willow enchantment when you're going deeper into green than you necessarily want to, and that can make things cluttered for a card like Thassa's Intervention, which requires double blue, and so it'll take some experimentation, but I quite like where I've arrived with the deck, and this is something that I'm just wanting to show off as something that, even if it's not the most competitive deck, is very fun as a strategy with this Etrata the Silencer, really being able to get in there, shuffle away, and then sneak back in and every turn. If the opponent's not prepared for this, you can win in 3 turns, and that's definitely something that you can have a lot of fun with. So at some stage I'll be doing a whole bunch of testing with this in ranked games, and I'll make a few more alterations to the list probably. I'll go over the sideboard. So Elder Spell for Planeswalker decks that might creep into the meta, and to try seize advantage for Vraska to suddenly ultimate, and Vraska who gets to ultimate is pretty scary, and that's pretty nice. Return to Nature, Assassin's Trophy, these are usual sideboard inclusions. Caliph, Beloved of the Sea, this is a card that I was considering to run in the main board, so there's a few flex spots where you can run Dryad of Delician Grove as a 1-off, 2-off, 3-off, 4-off, depending on your taste, how much you really value that fixing, but you can go up and down on certain slots. Even Omen of the Hunt you can take 1 or 2 off, and you can run something like Caliph, Beloved of the Sea, which offers this extra protection for your Enigmatic Incarnation or Thassa Deep Dwelling, depending on the answers the opponents are running. So next you have Naiad of the Hidden Coves, which I featured before, and this is where I was originally going with, to try and commit more to a control build to be able to do things in the opponent's turn, and I think that the 3 toughness is really the deal breaker for me, which puts it into the sideboard. And so this is something you can bring in if the opponent's not running things like Searing Spear, whatever the equivalent is that's legal and standard at the time. Then you can put this in and get that edge over the opponent on tempo. So in control mirrors, this could be pretty good. Then you have, I think, at least 1 or 2 Elspeth Nightmare somewhere. I think 3 or 4 off in the 75 total that you're running in the list. This card can just get so much value in this deck. It's really nice. Then there's Leyline of the Void. So that list by Kangaroo, which really inspired me to look more into Enigmatic Incarnation. Leyline of the Void is my favorite of the ley lines to use with it, because you can get out immediate disruption, and so it's interaction of sorts where the opponent, if they're running heavy on the escape cards, they're going to be blanked on those, and eventually you can sacrifice this to Enigmatic Incarnation and get something out yourself. Now, I believe in this actual list there's no CMC 5 creature, so I'll have to actually, reflect on that. But that's something where you can run like a Gravebreaker Lamia in the sideboard, and I may actually just do that, because that lifelink on Gravebreaker is pretty nice. Let's see here. Theros Beyond Death. Oh. There we go. So, yeah, here's a card which I think will see quite a bit of play for the being a 4/4 with lifelink. That's, to me, the most attractive quality about this, where this is something that you can actually tutor out. Even if you're not doing the Reanimator strategy, you're able to get this out and brick wall an aggressive strategy. They at least have to cough up some decent removal to get rid of Gravebreaker Lamia. So I think for this you could free up something like an Elder Spell or Return of Nature here. And then we've got Erebos' Intervention. This is interacting with the opponent's graveyard. A nice alternative to Thassa's Intervention, depending on what kind of control you need. And Leyline of the Void, I would still... I think it's probably worth actually building more into this for a sideboard plan, so to feature maybe more CMC 5 creatures who can threaten to take over the game. So this would be something that I'm gonna be looking into over my playthroughs with the deck. I'm still quite excited about exploring more with the deck, but I got excited when I discovered the Etrata the Silencer interaction with Enigmatic Incarnation, and that really encouraged me to put this video together to show this deck off, because I'm pretty excited to get the word out about it. And so I think Arasta of the Endless Web, this is pretty sweet for going against control decks and for aggressive decks, because you can clog the board much like a Gravebreaker Lamia, and you're going to get value much like the Naiad of Hidden Coves by getting this tempo value of Naiad of the Hidden Coves and the soft value from being able to get the tokens to swarm the opponent with. And depending on just how much they're going to be a control deck that's spammy on things like Opt, you can really creep into some really nice value with this. So it's going to take a lot more brewing, I think, but I think at the very least it's a very fun deck to play around with, and this should be pretty fun for the standard season to see just how this does and where Enigmatic Incarnation gets taken to, and see what other people come up with, and just where the ceiling of that card's potential lies. Thanks for joining me.